Hi everyone, Stepan here. I'm going to show you my round 2 game from Bošnjaci Open, and I have to say this is probably the most complex game, and a position you're about to see at the end of the game is one of the most heartbreaking and exciting positions I've ever had. And we are going to play it out against Nocti during the video so that I can try to improve on my mistakes. Now, once again, I have not looked at the game with the engine yet. I'm going to do that at the end of the video. You can see the times we had on the clock at the bottom and the top of the board, although the first time written here is wrong. It's a 90-minute game, so as soon as I make the first move, it should get to 90 minutes per player. So yeah, now once I play the d4, white has an hour and 30. So my prep for this game was pretty extensive. I have played this opponent before. He is about 2300. I beat him once when he was 1600, and I drew him once when he was about 2100. I don't remember. I had black in both of those games. He's very young, and of course his rating has skyrocketed. So I'll show you what my prep was. d4, d5 as expected, c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6, and normally I will go for the exchange Queen's Gambit declined, but in this game I had decided to allow the potential Vienna, Ragozin, anything else that could have happened, because my opponent usually goes into the Semi-Slav with c6. And I played bishop g5, allowing the Botvinic variation, the Moscow or the anti-Moscow, depending on what I would have done. But again, or the Cambridge Springs, let's say, with knight bd7. I had prep against all of these, but my opponent played bishop e7 in several games, so I was expecting that, and he played it once more. Now we have a regular Semi-Slav, but white has a bishop on g5, which black should be punishing with either dc or h6 instead of bishop e7, so white now just has a comfortable theoretical advantage. I played e3, which is fine, castles, queen c2 is the main move, knight bd7, which is fine, and black is only slightly worse, it's nothing major. And in this position there are a couple of moves. You can play rook a d1, you can play bishop d3, which I did, which is slightly imprecise, but it goes into my prep, and I had something very specific prepared. Bishop d3, my opponent played rook e8, which he has considered. Well, he's been thinking for about 10 minutes, I would say. You can see that he has an hour and 19. Before rook e8, he had an hour 30. And I was happy because this was my prep. I played castles, and now in 2 of his previous games, he's played knight f8. And I had prepared the move c5. Now, the engine gives this as +1 for white, but I think it's even more than that from a human perspective, because with the knight on f8, it's probably best to just bring the knight back and play for e5 after c5. And of course, b6, black isn't in time for b6. It doesn't do anything because my queen isn't on b3. I can just go b4 and create a very weak pawn on c6. So this position would have been great. Unfortunately, he played h6. And after bishop h4, he took on c4, which is the best move. It did take him a couple of minutes, but he took. And now we get this normal Semi-Slav plan of playing b5. And in this position, I played bishop b3 after, let's see, after 8 minutes, which is my first long think. I was debating between all 3 moves. And normally, without this bishop on e7 and with black's king still on e8, all 3 moves are viable. In this position, I have concluded that my bishop b3 was a mistake, but we will engine check at the end. I think the best move is bishop e2. The reason I played bishop b3, even though it allows... Wait, why is it showing the... Why is it showing this now? I wanted to record the game using the live boards. This was live on Lichess. Okay, let's turn off the annotations. This is the first time I saw that this is a dubious move. So anyway, The reason I played bishop b3 is because I wanted to go for knight e5 and sacrifices on f7, with his king on e8 that might just work. And there was a line in which it did work. I'm going to show it to you quickly. So bishop b7, black is of course playing for c5, that's the entire point. In many positions, a6 has to be played so that you don't blunder your b-pawn. Rook f to d1, which is fine, rook c8 playing for c5, and in this position I played queen e2, which seemed sensible, increasing the pressure on b5 and getting away from the rook. But when I was analyzing the game yesterday, I found, I want to say, a forced draw, basically a forced draw, because, well, you're about to see knight e5. Now with c5, then, which is the most logical move. Of course, the knight cannot be taken because I win a piece, because the queen is... Oh, sorry, black can still go knight d5, but after e4, I could take. I can also insert... No, it doesn't win a piece. I'm crazy. Yeah, because if I save my bishop, then black has time to save the queen. So if I do this, just queen takes and e4 doesn't do anything. I would have knight e4, knight d6 though, and I'm pretty sure this is good for white. Okay, I haven't analyzed this properly, it seems. The only line I was looking at is c5, which I think should be played. And now after dc5, the knight cannot take on e5 because the queen's hanging. So after queen c7, now I take on f7. And I'm dragging the king out into the open if the knight's taken. I sacrifice my bishop too, king takes, and queen b3. And of course, if the bishop blocks, I can just take all the pieces. So let's say king f5, queen c2 check. Once again, if the bishop blocks with bishop e4, I can take it. And after knight e4, the knight's hanging. So I think this is good enough to draw the game. Perhaps bishop g3 here, and f3 is coming, and I think I should have a very, very pleasant position. Although we will engine check this, I'm not 100% sure this was just an idea during analysis, but I think it should be a draw. In any case, I played queen e2. a5, not threatening to win the bishop because the bishop has the c2 square. So I played rook ac1 because I wanted to make sure my bishop has b1. Maybe I'll have queen d3 ideas as well. Queen b6. Okay, getting away from my rook, smart. Bishop c2, b4, and now I've considered taking on f6, but I'm not sure if that does anything. I don't really want to give away my bishop, so I played knight a4, and my opponent played queen b5, which is an excellent move. Not only threatening my queen, which is hanging, also threatening queen h5, and I cannot take that queen. If I take the queen, I lose a pawn by force because of takes, knight c5, and my opponent just takes a pawn. So I had to decline the queen trade while keeping my queen active, so queen d3. Now if the knight moves, I win. That's clear because of mate on h8. But my opponent plays queen h5. And here I thought for... Well, you can see that my opponent is on 27 minutes here. I'm on 58. And I played after 13 minutes bishop g3, because the tactical weakness in my position is due to the bishop. My opponent wants to play c5, and c5 is going to happen. But I had to calculate a very long line here. I calculated the next 7 moves, and I'm proud to say I calculated them correctly. I actually calculated 10 moves in one of the lines, or sorry, 8 moves in one of the lines, and it was correct. So if I do nothing, let's say I keep my bishop here, let's say like random move, c5, and now there's a clear threat to take and to take. And if I save my bishop now, then takes, queen takes, and I'm losing. So I played bishop g3. Now the problem with bishop g3, if the line I had calculated didn't work, would be that I'm basically getting destroyed because of a pin down the c file. So had I not seen the line that I'm about to show you, I would have taken on f6. Okay, c5, I have to take. My opponent's threatening c4. Knight c5, knight c5, rook c5. And now I have a problem. My opponent is threatening to go rook e c8 or rook d8. in both cases pinning my bishop, and that pin is extremely uncomfortable. So I had anticipated that and decided to go bishop a4. I kept double checking all the lines and getting into time trouble. Basically, you can see that I'm down to 26 minutes because if bishop a4 doesn't work, it loses on the spot, and I'll show you why. So rook d8. Now, if I retreat my queen, I'm much worse. But luckily for me, I have rook c5. Not only saving the game, but if my opponent takes the queen, actually winning the game. My opponent took on c5, which is correct. It may be tempting to go for mate, but it doesn't work because if rook d3, I take on h5, rook d1, my bishop defends, and at the end of the line, I simply win a pawn due to bishop c7. I've seen this before I played bishop g3, and there is no way to save the pawn. If you push, I take with the light squared bishop. So after rook c5, my opponent had to take on c5. That's clear. Now I have to save my queen and defend the rook, so queen c2. My opponent took on d1, queen d1, and played knight e4. And at this point, you can see my opponent has 6 minutes on the clock. I have 20, and that's a significant advantage. It's moved 25, so we've both been spending our clock time like crazy. I played bishop c2, getting my bishop into a good position and preparing queen d3. Bishop f6, my pawn is hanging. And now I have a choice. I can play queen b1, which I ended up playing, or I can actually get away with knight d2. And now if my opponent takes on b2, I take the knight, so takes. If bishop b2 now, I'm pretty sure I can hold with bishop h7. Pretty sure. But it would be extremely uncomfortable, so I didn't want to go for that. So I played queen b1. Okay, my opponent played queen c4, and now I was thinking, well, what if I try to do something active like knight e5? I was really afraid of queen e2, but during the game I'd completely missed bishop d3 here. Although the queen has the h5 square, bishop d3 is a great move, evicting the queen. But I didn't see it during my analysis in the game. So on queen c4 I just played bishop d3 immediately. The queen went to d5, and now I traded queens because my opponent has the bishop pair, and I'm constantly hanging stuff on g2 if I move my knight, so I wanted to get rid of the pressure. Bishop e4, queen e4, queen e4, bishop e4, and of course now it's a dead even position. The pawn structure is symmetrical. My opponent has the bishop pair, but that doesn't mean much because it's my move and I get to block the diagonal with bishop e5. So I played bishop e5 and offered the draw. I think objectively it's a draw. Of course, if my opponent takes on f3, then takes. If takes on g2, then I can insert bishop d8, and this is a dead draw. Because if bishop d5 takes, bishop a2 takes on b4, and that's it. But on bishop e5, my opponent declined the draw with bishop d8. Of course, he is much higher rated, and I would have done the same if I were in his position. However, he has 30 seconds on the clock, as you can see. Not that I have a lot of time, but I have 9 minutes, which is something. I played king f1 because I was afraid of my king being cut off. f6, bishop d4. I want to keep my bishop on the most active diagonal, which is for now this one. Okay, e5, bishop c5, king f7, knight d2. I don't think there's anything wrong with these moves. I want to move the bishop away, play f3, e4 to save my g-pawn, and then come in with my king. Bishop d3 check, king e1. This is why my king was on f1, so that I can actually get to the queen side. g6, f3. I want to go e4, king e6, e4, f5. Bishop e3, probing the h6 pawn. f4, once again bishop c5, the most active diagonal, king to d7, and here I played a3 because it just trades pawns. If anyone can win, it's white. It's black because black has the bishop pair, but if there's just one pawn on the board on the queen side, the b2 pawn, then I can, I think, never lose. So takes and bishop takes, and now I was confident that black really doesn't have any winning chances, because it's impossible to double attack this pawn with my setup. King c6, knight b3. I don't know. I'm not sure about knight b3. I was looking at b3 to just solidify the light squares, but maybe that's unnecessary. Also, instead of king c6, my opponent could have gone h5, which is interesting. But okay, king c6, knight b3. Bishop b6, claiming the best diagonal, and in this position, I think I gave the game away. So during the game, I was really happy with my move, g3. Notice that I have 4 minutes on the clock. My opponent has less than a minute, so the moves aren't going to be precise. 4 minutes for me is extreme time trouble. I played g3, and I actually think I found the forced win for black. We're going to see whether I'm right or not, but in hindsight, I should have gone knight c1 and just chase the bishop away somewhere, and b3, keep everything solid, and there are no infiltration points for my opponent. But I played g3. Now on g3, my opponent did not react. He played a4. If fg3, hg3, I have a huge problem to deal with. My opponent has a passed h-pawn. I haven't even considered that during the game. But I think this is completely winning for black. Black just threatens to queen the pawn. So a4 to start with, chasing the knight away, threatening to come in. If the king comes to b3, I can resign, so basically my knight is tied down. And now there are several moves, but I was looking at improving the bishop first, preventing any knight a2, knight c3 ideas, because the knight on c3 would be excellently placed. So bishop c4, also preparing to get the bishop to e6 if needed. And now let's say knight e2. This can be traded off, and you just push your pawns. So takes, h5. How am I supposed to prevent this plan? If my king is completely tied down to defending against the passed h-pawn, then this is going to happen. And I'm going to lose this pawn and the a-pawn queens. So I was trying to make f4 work, but it doesn't really work, because black is still left with a passed pawn, and of course this king is too close to my pawns. So I think this is losing. I mean, now that I see this position, I'm sure it's losing. Maybe white had an improvement after fg3, but my conclusion is that g3 is a blunder, or at least it's a very imprecise move. In any case, my opponent played a4, I went knight c1, and now, of course, still taking on g3 transposes to that position we just had a look at, but my opponent played bishop c4. And now I took on f4, and now I was happy. ef4. And I have to watch out for one thing only. My opponent queening the h-pawn or the f-pawn. And I have to stay within the square of the f-pawn, because on g4 I'm planning to play h3 after h5, and on g4 I take with the f-pawn first so that the h-pawn isn't passed. And then it's only the passed f-pawn, and I can safely guard against it with my king as long as my king stays either within the square or on one of these outside the square, so that I can come in. So I was confident here. Also, I have a passed pawn. I played knight e2, and my opponent took on e2, which I was really surprised to see, because now there are no chances. He could have gone g5, tried to win, but I don't think he would have won. In any case, bishop e2 takes 4 minutes on the clock, 50 seconds on the clock, g5, and now h3. Or sorry, I played king d3 first. h5, now I have to play h3 to prevent g4. And my opponent played bishop d8. If g4 is played, once again, if I take with the h-pawn, then I could lose. Not that I will, because I'm still within the square. But it's just safer to take this way, because now I'm, as I said, within the square of the f-pawn. And I could even win. But he played bishop d8, preventing bishop to e7, which would have been incredibly strong, and preparing bishop f6. If I allow bishop f6 to be unopposed, then I will be in big trouble, because my bishop will be tied down to the defense of the b-pawn. So I played bishop b4, what I think is the only move. And on bishop f6, I played bishop c3. The king and pawn endgame is a dead draw, because we both have a passed pawn. My opponent on the f-file, me on the e-file, and both kings have to stay within the squares of the pawns. So if takes, takes, and again, this trick doesn't work. My king is within the square. And white wins. So black would have never been able to play g4, and we would have just shuffled the kings somewhere. It doesn't matter where. Black mustn't leave this square, I mustn't leave this square, and it's a draw. So on bishop c3, my opponent went back with bishop e7, which is fine. But now after king c4, I have a more active king. I'm still within the square of the f-pawn, so g4 never works. And in this position, my opponent played the losing move. Believe it or not. My opponent needs to just wait. Somehow. I don't know. Anything. Any move. There's no way for me to make progress. If my opponent plays bishop d8, bishop e7, that's it. That's just it. But he played a3, and that allows bishop f6. So takes. Of course, if my opponent doesn't take back, then I just have two passed pawns and I should be winning. But he took and I played bishop f6, and my hand started shaking because I'm obviously winning now. g4, once again I take with the f-pawn. H takes. H takes. He played king d6. Yeah. In this position, I played g5, which I think is fine, saving my bishop, king e6. And if I can win this f-pawn, I'm going to win easily. So king d3. My opponent plays bishop c1. I went king e2. My opponent went king f7. And I think I blundered into a draw in this position. When the game finished, I had no idea where I had gone wrong. And my friend who was watching the game live in a bar next to the tournament hall was analyzing the endgame with an international master. And he told me that the IM had blundered into a draw the same way I did, but that the position was plus 70. He told me that, so I knew that it was winning. But I still couldn't figure out why. And I couldn't sleep that night. And I was shuffling the pieces in my head. I just couldn't find an improvement. And it didn't seem to me that my move, king f3, had been wrong. But I've come to the conclusion that after king f3, the position is a draw. We will check with the engine. But before we do, we are going to play out my idea against Nocti, my improved idea. I think e5 wins. And the reason e5 wins is that as soon as the king moves to one of these two squares, I'm going to push the other pawn to a light square. Once the pawn gets to a light square, the pawns will not be able, my opponent will not be able to double attack the pawns. So when a pawn reaches e7, it's resignable because the bishop cannot take one of the pawns and the king cannot take the other. I'll explain why this setup is a draw. Because once the bishop takes on g5 and the bishop takes, then my opponent's king doesn't take the pawn, takes the other pawn. Doesn't take the bishop, takes the other pawn, and I'm left with a bishop versus king. It's a draw. The reason that works is that my opponent has this distracting move f3, threatening to queen, which I have to take. Let's say my king is on g4, my opponent plays f3, I take it, and then the bishop takes the other pawn, the king takes this one, and it's a draw. However, after e5, I think white is winning. So let's play this out against Nocti, and then we will get back to the game. Okay, so I set this up on Nocti themes, and that's my favorite feature at Nocti. You can set up any position, choose the difficulty with which Nocti is going to play against you. I think for this one, I'm gonna go with queen c2, queen 2. I think that's about 2300 FIDE. You can see that I have a bunch of themes here, so I use this all the time. Let's save the element, let's save the theme. And let's play it out. Okay, so let's do this. So my idea was e5. Let's see how Nocti plays. I'm sure this is a win now. I just couldn't find the defense. Maybe I'm not good enough to find the defense, but we will see. In any case, this is a great way to practice the position you'd messed up. Okay, king f3 has to be winning. This is extremely weird. Taking doesn't work because I just take the bishop. So king f3. Okay. Let's come in. Now the bishop is tied down, and I'm gonna have to watch out. If I play king f5, then f3 could be deadly. For a moment, well, I can wait. Okay, I'm still not threatening to go. Okay, f3 doesn't work now because I have bishop b6. So king f5, f3, bishop b6 should be good. I can also throw in g6 check first or e6 check first. Which one? Which one? Which one? Probably e6. Interesting. Now I don't have e7 because once I move my bishop, my opponent wins. So bishop b6, bishop e8. I think I found a win. Okay, so let's see. Bishop b6. Bishop e1, excuse me. Yeah, and now bishop c5 check, so that the king is outside of the square of the other pawn. Let's see. Okay. Now if king g8, I just go e7 and I win. If... Oof, what? Yeah, now I'm just winning. King f7, g6 check. Aha! No, I'm winning. I'm winning. I take, and my opponent goes king f7, and yeah, this works. King f7, I just take the bishop, and I'm up a b pawn. Okay, now it's clear that it's over. Okay, so it worked. Okay, we shouldn't really analyze this. I'm just gonna make a queen. Okay, so let's stop here. I'm winning. Okay, so this is how I use Nocti. I'm gonna play this position out a bunch more times because I'm not too convinced, but we still have to engine check it later, so we will make sure it was winning. So if you want to do the same thing, go to Nocti, and it's a great platform. As I said, the themes are my favorite part because you get to play custom positions that you'd already messed up. This is my game against Željko Bedić, my game against Lovro Čupić. So I use it to my game against Cyril Mompu. I'm sorry for the French pronunciation. Anyway, let's go back and do the engine analysis and finish the game, actually. Boy, back to the game. Okay, yeah, you saw what happened there. Now I'll show you what happened in the game. I played king f3 instead of e5, and my opponent played king g6. I went king g4. My opponent waited with bishop d2. He mustn't undefend the pawn. And now I became aware that there is no way to make progress. There's just no way to make progress. So I waited with bishop d8. My opponent waits with bishop c1. And finally, I have to play e5 if I'm going to make progress. And on e5, my opponent plays f3. King f3, and now not taking the pawn loses very simply. If bishop takes, then bishop takes, and king takes, I have a winning king and pawn endgame, and it's so easily winning that a complete beginner could win this. So on king takes f3, my opponent played king f5, and I was devastated. This is just a dead draw. I don't have a single move to prevent bishop takes g5. If I push one of the pawns and sacrifice it, then the bishop gives itself up for the other pawn. For example, here. And if I keep pushing, my opponent just goes here and takes the pawn once it reaches g7. So on king f5, it's a dead draw. I went bishop f6. My opponent took. I took back. Of course, once again, if king takes bishop, I win. But my opponent is 2300, so king takes pawn. And draw by force, not agreed. A painful game. What can I say? It would have been great to start with 2 out of 2. But what can you do? My endgame. I forgot to check the game with the engine. So let us go back to the beginning, to the first position that I really didn't know, which is this one. Let's enable the engine and start. Okay, so my opponent played b5, and yeah, bishop e2 was correct. I played bishop b3. Oof. Okay, bishop b7, rook fd1 is fine, rook c8, knight e5 was the best move. Now let's check my sacrifice. Knight e5, c5 takes, queen c7 is correct, knight f7 works, come on! Okay, this is incredible. It took me, I've been looking at this position for an hour. King f5, yeah, that's the only move. Queen c2, bishop e6. Okay, if the king goes back, I just go queen b3. I saw that. If bishop e4, then knight e4, knight e4. And I was thinking bishop g3. Oh yeah, there's g4. Why didn't I consider g4? I was thinking bishop g3. Idiot. I hope I wouldn't have played this during the game. Queen c5 threatens to trade queens. I don't have time to play f3. Why did I think this worked? Okay, but g4 works. Yeah, okay, g4 works. And now I'm guessing it's just a perpetual. Wait, is it? Takes. Okay, this is... I definitely did not see this. And even if I had seen this, I wouldn't have gone into this because I would assume that I'm down a piece for 3 pawns. Okay, so even though knight e5, knight f7 works according to the engine, it wouldn't work for me. So it would have been a blunder. I played queen e2. Now it's equal. This is fine. This is fine. Knight a4 is okay, but bishop f6 would have been better. Queen d3 is the best move. Queen h5 is the best move. And the engine wants me to take on f6. I played bishop g3. Oh, how is this bad? Have I miscalculated? c5 takes. Okay, throwing in bishop f3 doesn't really change much. If bishop f3, g f3, queen f3. Perhaps I wouldn't have played queen a6. I don't know. I was looking at queen a5. Oh, but it's hanging... sorry, queen b5, but it's hanging 3 times. Okay, I hope I would have found queen a6. Okay, I just thought this was okay for me. I wasn't really afraid of my opponent giving up the bishop for a pawn. Okay, but dc5, knight c5, knight c5, rook c5, bishop e3 is better than bishop a4, but bishop a4 is okay. Rook d8, rook c5 is good, queen c5 is good, queen c2. How is this -1? Why am I worse? Okay, knight e5 is inaccurate. He should have gone bishop d5. But I can just go bishop b3. I don't get that. Okay, bishop c2. Wow. Queen b1 losing. Knight d2 is good? This was my weird safety move. What happens on knight d2, queen d2, bishop b2? Do I really go bishop h7? Oh, idiot. Idiot. I didn't even see queen d8. Oh, I just win the queen. Okay, I didn't see this. Okay, so I played queen b1. Why is this losing? Queen c4 is a mistake. Bishop d5 winning for black. Why? I don't understand. So let's say I go king f1. Oh, because my bishop is hanging. Okay, I'm stupid. So let's say bishop d3. Here, king f1. Why is this losing? Okay, maybe I do have to step back. Oh, now I see. Because of queen c2. b3 takes, and queen c2 queening. My god. Oof. Luckily, my opponent had no time on the clock. So queen c4. Bishop d3 is now equal, and yeah, now it is equal. As expected, this is fine, 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 fine. f3 is okay, e4 is okay. Okay, bishop e3 is okay, bishop c5 is okay. I played a3 instead of b3, exchanging pawns. b3 was more precise, but this seems fine. King c6. h5 was better, but okay. King c6 is understandable. Knight b3 dubious. And I can now see that g3 is a blunder. It's written in red text. Yeah. Okay, now let's check my analysis. fg3, hg3. a4, knight c1, bishop c4. Correct. Knight e2 takes, and h5. And I'm completely losing. f4 was my desperate attempt, but it's still just a passed pawn. Yeah, I cannot save this. This is hopeless. I knew this was hopeless. Okay. So g3 could have lost me the game. Unfortunately, my opponent was under a minute. Knight c1 once again. fg. g4? I took on f4. Why is this bad? Knight e2. I don't understand. Okay, so let's say g5. Let's say I get the knight to c3. Bishop here. If my opponent takes, it's a draw. So what happens if I prevent... Oh, there is a3. Oh, there is a3 if my bishop moves. Okay, so let's see. Here, here. Yeah, now my opponent is just queening. Can even take on... No, cannot take here. Yeah, but this is good enough. Okay, yeah, this is completely losing. And I could have lost again. I thought this was fine. Wait, where are we? Yeah, on bishop e2 we are fine. Takes, takes. Yeah, now it's just a draw. Fine, 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 fine. And a3 must be losing. Yeah. Yeah. And finally, let's check e5 plus 8. My god. g5 is fine. This is fine. e5 plus 90. I went from plus 96 to 0. Oh my god. Yeah. Yeah, it's just over. I can do whatever I want. Now my opponent has to prevent king f5, I think. Can I get away with king f5 and queen before he does? No? Okay. Oh, I have to leave a square open for the bishop. So here, and if f3, I can check and my bishop is in time to go back. Is that right? No, or I queen first. Wait a minute. I want to stay on the other side of the pawn if I can. So let's repeat once and go here. Okay, let's say I wait. My opponent just waits. So we're not making progress. But I can actually do this now because my bishop is in time to go back. I can throw in a check first. I think either one works, but okay, let's listen to the engine. Okay, I mean, there should be nothing wrong with this either. No? Okay. Wow. So it wasn't simple even after e5. Okay, so I just have to queen. I don't have to bother with... Ah, okay, what's the difference? What's the difference with the king on g7? Couldn't I just pick up the pawn? No, because of king g6. Wait, and in this position, why doesn't the same thing work? Oh, okay, okay, yeah. Because this pawn is not blockaded by the king. Now I can just safely take the f pawn. And the king cannot approach. Okay, so it wasn't simple. I'm not too upset that I blundered into that draw. And on king f3, yeah, it's just a draw. Maybe even if I had an hour on the clock, maybe I would have still messed it up. But at least I improved on my play during analysis. Okay, thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.